Okay. We'll call to order, everybody. Thank you and welcome to the Grand Forks City Council meeting Monday, December 20th, 2021. If I get a roll call, please, Maureen.
Weigel.
Here.
Dockler. Here. Weber. Here. Mock. Here. Kavami. Sandy. And Bean. Ken, are you on? Well, we have a quorum, so
All right.
confirm that.
Thank you. 1.2, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There, Ken is on now, Maureen, so.
Thank
Evening, Ken. Oh, he disappeared again. All right, we've got 1.3 mayor's announcements, a few comments. We're continuing, had a great meeting today. The team did with Black and Veatch and continue to move forward on the Fufang Development Group. It's been all hands on deck and people are really working hard to make sure we get that one right. A couple of the events over the last few weeks, we're over at the Evolve annual breakfast meeting, so a big thank you to Maggie Smith, everything they do over there at Evolve and their work with businesses in town. Give a thanks to Mr. Bombach. I don't see him, he's the president there, and we got Greta back in the room who's the vice president of Evolve, so we got some local people here working on that within City Hall as well. We had Bill King came to town, so any of you that have followed Cirrus Aircraft over the years here in Grand Forks, several decades, or at least a couple decades now with Bill King. He's really been the leader of that front when it comes to Grand Forks and a champion of Grand Forks, I would say. So got to have a nice dinner with him and he brought on the new guys, got to meet some new people that are going to be filling his role. The exciting news is they're looking to expand in Grand Forks and they did purchase that land about this time last year. So we're excited to see where they go and where they build in Grand Forks and creating more jobs. They did just install a new autoclave, which is an even larger one, multi-million-dollar piece of equipment that helps finalize and the composite parts and strengthens them. So that was pretty exciting to see them continue to invest. I was down in Fargo speaking on, they have an Eggs and Issues infrastructure meeting. It was part of their chamber year-end event, and we were talking mainly on the Red River Valley water supply. I know Ken's been a big proponent of that and our Garrison Diversion member as well locally. We had a presentation and spoke on that, even made a newspaper article, but those are some exciting projects that hopefully get accelerated with some more infrastructure money coming into town. We've got a big retirement coming up. Mark Walker is going to be retiring. It was a cold day back in November 12th of 1992 when a project engineer by the name of Mark Walker joined the city of Grand Forks, and 29 years later, he's moving on. So he's been a company man for a long time and really done some great work. Even up till just recently, I got to work with him on a couple things. So pretty exciting if you get to see him. Why don't we give Mark a round of applause for his service. In true engineer fashion, he's not here tonight. But a couple ribbon cuttings. The Alaris at Hugo is a pretty innovative setup they've got there. It was nice to see the incoming CEO, Katie Lawrenson, came up from Minneapolis. Great to get to meet her. She'll be taking the helm here in the new year. And seeing the ways that Alaris continue to partner with the city of Grand Forks, and probably give a thank you to Randy Newman, who's been at the helm there for a long time and done a great job. We're also over for a ribbon cutting at Florian and Sons Excavating. I think they had the shop about the cleanest I've ever seen it since the day they got in there. So they cleaned it up pretty well for that, which was nice to see. I was wondering if they were getting any work done, just seeing how clean it was, but he assured me they were. Bruce has done a great job over there since he took over from Glenn, so it was nice to get out, check out the new facility. Lastly, just want to give my appreciation on behalf of the residents of Grand Forks for the police department. We had the awards ceremony just last week. I really think the highlight was those kids that had helped out. I know that made the news story too, but that could have been a bad day, and some kids that were trained pretty well got the license plate number and were able to track down a car and as part of a kidnapping. And it just the community effort from our police department to kind of know the neighborhoods and know where to look and know let's call it the rocks to look under and find that it could have been a bad story, and it turned out to be a good one and a real community effort. And lastly, just wanted to highlight, we're up on the 4-year cycle for Kalia Accreditation, which is a nationwide accreditation for the police department. And just to highlight how exceptional this is to be able to be accredited by Kalia. In the state of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, there's only 4 departments that have this accreditation, and the highest distinction with accredited with excellence, there's only 1 department. So we have the highest level of service and programming and everything that Chief and the team does there is at such a high level that this would be considered the top department basically in this tri-state region. And only 7 of them, I believe, in the entire nation have that accreditation. So you just wonder what a great job our police department does every day. It's proven once again. I was glad to be a part of the process and really proud of all of our men and women in blue. So if we give them a round of applause too. All right. Well, we will move on. That's all I have for announcements. So 2 awards, presentation, appointments, and proclamations.
COVID-19 update.
Mr. Dulitz, please.
Mayor Boczynski and members of the council, I'm Michael Dulitz with Grand Forks Public Health, here to do a COVID-19 update. So looking at our week in review, it's been largely the same over the past 2 weeks, with even the number of our cases the same. Tests have been very similar, percent positivity has been very similar, as well as vaccinations. Unfortunately, though, there have been 2 additional COVID-19 deaths, bringing our total up to 102 since the start of the pandemic. Taking a quick year in review look, hopefully these numbers don't change too terribly much, but when we compare 2020 to 2021, we've had about half as many COVID deaths, as well as roughly half as many COVID cases, as well as a decrease in our overall case fatality rate, which I'll go into in just a couple minutes. When we compare that to nationwide data is going to be a little bit more lagging, but we are still leaps and bounds better than what we're seeing in the nation as a whole, with the case fatality rate in the nation at almost 2%, falling to 1.4% this far in 2021. We still do have a lot of progress to make, though. In 2019, the case fatality, the overall death rate for influenza and pneumonia was only 15.2 per 100,000, so there is still progress to be made and considerations to be had. So I wanted to spend some time looking at the fall of 2020 versus the fall of 2021. So largely, a lot of our COVID cases seem to be following a pattern where we have a small outbreak in the spring, followed by a bigger outbreak in the fall, small outbreak spring, bigger outbreak in the fall, in the kind of 2 years that we have data for. So when we look at when we compare the fall outbreaks, because those are probably the most reliable information we have, I thought it was really good to take a look at it based off of a measure that I see used in a lot of places, comparing the cumulative case count based on the day when the 100th case of the outbreak was identified. So for instance, this past summer, we were down to 0 cases for a while. I looked at the bottom of that date. That was the start of the outbreak, and then I looked to when we got to 100 cases cumulative, and that's when I created this graph. So what we're seeing as a difference between 2020 and 2021 is essentially a lot more of a linear increase in the total number of cases, as opposed to a more logarithmic or exponential type increase in the cases that we saw in 2020. We saw that twice with an outbreak in August and in November, whereas right now we've had kind of that that steady across the board between 30 and 60 cases per 100,000 per week. We are seeing a difference in the overall character of our outbreaks. And we're also seeing a difference in how the deaths are happening with the outbreaks. So what we saw this year was a significant delay from when we had that 100th case, which coincidentally was the same day in 2020 and 2021. We had a significant delay before we started seeing deaths again, but we did see deaths that occurred in 2021, as I've frequently mentioned when I come up here. Probably most concerning that I see when I compare the 2020 to 2021 is that it seems to be a pretty close correlation on that case fatality rate. So looking at the number of deaths divided by the overall number of cases. So once we hit, it almost feels like we hit kind of a critical mass of cases in the community, and then the deaths start happening, and they start happening at a relatively consistent rate. So overall, still, our death rate is much lower than both the national average as well as many of our peer counties in the state, but there is still a lot of correlation that is happening here. The reason why I do bring up these trends when we're looking at 2020 versus 2021, looking at spring outbreaks, things like that as well, is when we start looking into the Omicron variant and what that impact is going to look like on Grand Forks County. Based off of what our history has been, and this is only looking backwards, what our history has been when we identify the new variant in the community, it seems to be there's a fair amount of lag time from when it first shows up, on a national level to when it shows up in North Dakota versus when it shows up in Grand Forks County. So we're pretty far down the line from when the variant gets identified to when it gets to us. For instance, this past year, the Delta variant was first identified in North Dakota. I believe it was on roughly June 24th, and we didn't start seeing an increase in cases until late July. Didn't see like a real critical mass of cases until almost well into September. So what that does buy us, even if we can't necessarily stop the spread of Omicron, is it buys us some time to get a better understanding of what Omicron is going to do to the community if this follows that same pattern. And again, we still have been fortunate to have a relatively low death rate. Unfortunately, each death that happens is a tragedy, as well as the permanent disability that a lot of people are experiencing as well. Moving over to vaccinations, we are getting really, really close to that 60% threshold. We only have 750 people left that need to at least get started on their series to get us closer to that 60% threshold. And then when we look at boosters, almost 20% of the community as a whole, or the county as a whole, has received a booster shot for COVID-19. And of the fully vaccinated population, about a third of that fully vaccinated population has received a booster. And then looking at our vaccine coverage rate compared to our peer counties, unfortunately, Cass County did beat us. They're at 61% of their community that has been fully vaccinated, but we are pretty close behind. And unfortunately, we are still having a very hard time with getting people vaccinated in Ward County. So looking at the bottom lines, our strength right now is the pattern of spread with COVID being such that Grand Forks is generally hit pretty late on with a variant. So I'm hoping that will carry out with this variant as well. We are seeing a decrease in our overall death and case counts, significantly less than both our peers as well as the country as a whole. We aren't seeing that downward trend, though, that I was hoping that we'd see by now, especially when we compare to last year's outbreak. The Omicron variant does remain largely unknown and is still kind of the topic du jour, but we do still have some time to learn some more about where Omicron is going to go in the community. With that, I am open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dulitz. Any questions for Mr. Dulitz, council members? Mr. Weber, please.
Could we go back a slide? The CDC now recommends masking indoors for all people. This has been on the COVID report for months now. And Omicron, there's still lots to learn about Omicron. It's an evolving situation, but all the indications are that this is an incredibly rapidly moving variant, right? Are there any recommendations from public health at this time regarding masking?
Sorry, Councilmember Weber. The recommendations that we would have would follow along with the CDC guidance. The best thing that you can do is get vaccinated. The next best thing is to get your second dose, and the next best thing is to get your third dose after that 6-month time frame, as well as the CDC guidelines regarding masking are included on our dashboard on a daily basis. And so those are the recommendations that we do pass along when people ask for a recommendation.
Your recommendation is that we should be masking indoors.
That's what the CDC guidelines say, and that's, those are the recommendations that we pass along.
Let's go a different direction. The testing, that's always been a fantastic strength here in North Dakota. Governor Burgum has been a champion of testing. And Grand Forks, it's hard to imagine better testing facilities and processes than anywhere else. It's just wonderful. The testing is, well, over at the Pollard Center, Monday through Friday, basically 7 to 11. It's great. It works out very well for individuals like myself. But there are a lot of people, community members, even students, for whom that is not a good time. Is there any chance, and public health is already so overworked and has been for a couple of years now, but is there any chance that we could have even just one day a week of afternoon or maybe even evening hours where testing would be available?
I'd probably defer to Debbie on answering that question. While she does come up, I will mention that Walls Medicine Center does offer testing as well as All True when you do have a visit, but I'll defer to Debbie.
And I believe there's a charge for the testing at Walls, is that correct? Right. The testing at the Pollard Center is free and almost immediate. It's amazing. And the number of volunteers from All True, from the medical community working there all the time, it's just fantastic. Thanks.
I'll be happy to answer the question. Mayor Bochensky, members of the council, Mr. Weber, the reason that we have selected the 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. time frame at that particular site is because Ultra is processing our PCR testing on those days. We also do the rapid antigen testing, but in order for those samples to get over to Ultra on the same day and be processed and give people same day results, we need that time frame. Other options that are available for students are also at Wilkerson from noon to 4. Some of the same people work at both places. So there is a student option that's a little bit later. And then as Michael mentioned, there's a number of private entities. Ultru also does testing at all of their express clinics and their primary care options for people who need it because they have symptoms. And then also through the emergency room, though we really would prefer that people not go there for testing. So we're designed to be a surveillance test site for people who are traveling, want to know their status. Maybe they've been exposed, but they have no symptoms. It's a really good option for us. We're probably unique in that we offer both types of testing simultaneously there. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I don't mean to be critical at all, because as I've said, and I'll keep saying it, the process there is just amazing. It's fantastic. But is there any concern that I think I heard you refer to at one time, we've got the same limited population getting tested over and over again. And that's part of why I was asking about possible changes of hours. Now, you've given us some different resources. I hope that people are aware of that. But I'll stop now and let you respond. Thanks.
I would say that with everything, there are always people that we miss, and we're trying to make sure that we get this message out to more people. We started working with some different groups on vaccination, and we can certainly expand that education and availability to testing as much as possible. Rapid antigen testing and even home testing kits are becoming more common, and they're a really good way for people to test when they've been exposed or when they want to travel, so we're recommending those as well. But our testing site site is free. We're able to do that because of the federal funding that we receive, and we don't charge a fee for it. So we like to promote that for people, and certainly we could work on transportation options if that's a barrier.
Yeah. Mr. Dulitz pointed out that Grand Forks, our stats compared to the national stats, we're doing well in the face of it all. I think that even Grand Forks is doing much better than the rest of the state as well in terms of deaths, et cetera. But the Omicron variant is coming, showed up in the state for the first time today, seems to be a rapidly moving variant, and Minnesota, they're just next door, they're overwhelmed. Pretty much across the state, their health system is overwhelmed by this. And I've already asked, but I'll ask again, the recommendations that local health department is making are consistent with the CDC. And there's not much more to say than that?
Mr. Weber, that's correct. We do recommend masking in indoor settings. We feel that that's the most layered approach. Vaccination obviously is first, as Michael mentioned, but masking ensures that if anyone has a breakthrough infection, they're not transmitting it to others. And it's a respectful thing that we do for one another to show that we care and we don't want to transmit the disease. We recognize that there are a lot of challenges to implementing that in a number of places because we have promoted vaccines as our way out of this, and we'd like to think that that would do the job, but we need to get to a higher level of herd immunity before I think we can all take our masks off, especially in light of the Omicron variant. There's just a lot we don't know yet.
Yes.
We want to preserve the hospital capacity too, and we've been watching that information very closely. It's part of our dashboard, but that is a huge priority.
Let me ask about hospital capacity. I believe that last year at this time, Altru had prepared for the pandemic and kind of cleared the decks for a potential wave. At this point, Altru tried to return to some degree of business as normal, so the capacity at our local hospital is not the same as it was a year ago, so it's much easier to overwhelm. Is that accurate at all?
I think that's a fair statement without speaking too much on behalf of Altru, but one data point that I do know is that about 25% of their emergency room visits are as a result of COVID. So certainly that is a stressor on a health system if you are having 25% more visits.
Yeah. And Mr. Mayor, of course, we absolutely value freedom of choice and individual decision-making power, but I believe we're all in favor of please consider getting vaccinated and wearing masks indoors. Thank you, Ms. Swenson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Any further comments, council? Thank you, Mr. Dulitz. All right, thank you. Moving on to public hearings and second readings of ordinances.
3.1, public hearing and second reading of an ordinance to amend the street and highway plan to include the public rights-of-way shown as dedicated on the plat of TK Industrial Park Re-subdivision.
Thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing at this time, and keep in mind, we got Dave and Jeff here from Coast Materials too, if anyone has any further questions, but we're second time around, so open the public hearing if anyone has any. All right, public hearing period is closed. Like I said, be looking for any comments or motion.
Move approval.
Got a motion from Mr. Weigel, a second from Vice President Mock. Any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. Mr. Was it how do I say it? Everbar and Grousman, is that right? Grousam. That's pretty good off the top here, but thanks for being here today, gentlemen. Thanks for your investment in Grand Forks, continuing investment in the town, so really appreciate it. And showing up here, not everyone shows up, so thank you.
Thank you. Mayor, they shared with me, we sometimes go perfunctory through these planning and zoning. It's not really about planning and zoning, it's really about economic development, and they already do have interest in this business park that they're creating, and so and they are interested in furthering how can they incentivize it. So but the good news is they already have interest. They're ready to start next spring, and this is going to be a terrific redevelopment of an area that we didn't think would redevelop this quickly.
Yeah, I don't know, Jeff, you want to say something quickly, let people know about what's there? I mean, this is your chance. You got at least dozens of people watching from home, so maybe someone in search of what you have.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. We're excited, when we came up here and purchased Wells facility to continue what that operation was, but this kind of fell into our lap, and it's something that we've done in a couple of other communities, so this just seemed to really fit, and it fell into place, and I think a lot with Todd and Keith and a lot of other people here at the city that we're very thankful and excited to have this go forward. And I know that there's some internal people helping us get this, some people looking at that property, and as he'd mentioned, there'll be shovels in the ground next spring on some of those lots already, and this was the final step to now we can go about it, and we'll get that street put in right away in the spring and have a nice industrial park. So,
Sounds great.
All right.
Well, thank you.
all right, thank you.
You have any, we got one comment. Is it for?
Move approval. Or do we need to?
We've already voted in the past, so I think we're
Okay,
Can't get in trouble now.
no, yeah, it's already done. So unless he wants to pull it back. So all right, thank
Great.
you.
Thank
Much
you.
appreciated.
3.2, public hearing and second reading of an ordinance amending the zoning map to rezone to R4 Multifamily District Lot 116, Block D, Wilmer Edition.
All right, thank you. We'll go through the same procedure. We'll open the public hearing for item 3.2. All right, seeing no one, the public hearing period is closed. Are you looking for any comments or motions from council? Got a motion to approve from Vice President Mock. Got a second from Mr. Weigel. They seem to be the two attentive ones tonight. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. All right. End of the year, he's approving everything twice. Great to see. All right, we're on to action items. I know we've got a couple new ones on here, 4.1 and 4.2. We did want to pull, as well as 4.26. So if there's any other that council would like to pull to discuss, just let me know. I'm going to, Ms. Mock first.
I'd ask to be recused from 417.
417. Get a motion to recuse Ms. Mock from 417. We got a motion from Dockler, second from Mr. Weber. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. So Ms. Mock is recused from 4.17. And Ms. Dockler, did you have some other items you'd like pulled tonight?
4.24, please.
4.24. All right, so we'd be looking for on a consent agenda to approve 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, parts A through D, 4.11, 4.13, 4.14, 4.15, 4.16, 4.17, 4.18, 4.19, 4.20, 4.21, 4.22, 4.23, and then 24 and 25 we'll have to do separately, and pulled 26. So that would be all. So if I get a motion to approve those items?
Move approval.
Got a motion from Mr. Veen and a second from Mr. Weber. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. All those motions are approved. So we're left with 4.1, 4.2, 4.24, 4.25, and 4.26. So if you'd start with 4.1.
4.1, budget amendment for additional contribution to defined benefit pension plan, and I'll come up to the podium.
Thank you. This is certainly an exciting one with sales tax collections doing as well as we did. I was also in there at the Insurance and Pension Committee with Mr. Weber as well. So this is in addition to our normal payment to the defined benefit pension plan.
And Mr. Weigel.
And Mr. Weigel was there. He was there. Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
How dare you?
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. But I think it's a great opportunity to, to show a commitment to our employees, both past, present, and future. And it also will get us to the end much quicker, especially when you put the time value of money and the appreciation that we'll get on that. And it could also help out with our bond rating. So I think all in all, it's a great story. So if you want to add something, I know Mr. Shimke's here, and he was probably one of my highlights to get to hear from him at the end of that meeting, because you do a lot of this stuff, but to hear it coming from an employee and that was in that group and his appreciation, I just wanted council to be able to hear that appreciation as well. So we can give a few moments for him.
Yes, Mayor Boczynski, City Council members, the mayor summed it up very well. We recently had a pension committee meeting. We do recommend a budget amendment to put an additional $1 million toward the defined benefit pension plan contribution coming from the sales tax that is performing much better than budget. With that accelerated payment that gained favor with both our actuaries, actually was one of their takeaways in their PowerPoint before they knew we were doing a budget amendment, a takeaway to accelerate that to mitigate future risk, as well as our rating agency conversations at the time of the bond sale had gained favor too with that recommendation. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Darren Shimke to give you an employee perspective of the support to funding of the plan.
Mr. Shimke, thanks for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. My name is Darren Shimke. I work at the Grand Forks Fire Department. I have the privilege of serving on the Pension Insurance Committee for the City of Grand Forks, representing employees. Thankfully, the city employees and the employee rep group have expressed some faith in me over the last few years, so I do appreciate that. As I reflected back on my statements on our meeting, the committee meeting on December 8th, it led me to request to come up and speak to the entire council, because I think sometimes the message gets lost over the years, and I'm guilty of that as well. You know, there's a lot of history with issues with the pension and steps with the pension, improvements and things like that, going way back to before 95. And I've been exposed to a lot of those different issues, and over time those issues get lost. And it's to keep communication open. This particular, specifically this issue, it needs to be expressed to the entire council, and that is on behalf of the members of the what we call the old defined benefit plan. We are very, very grateful for the city's support. That support, that moral obligation, words cannot express how proud we are to be able to have the backing of the city. So with that, Mayor Boczynski, we appreciate that, your support, the council, HR, finance, Mr. Phelan, and even spraying a little bit further, a lot of people may not realize that the pension insurance committee meets, a couple times a year. It's an hour, but to have the support of the city, to allow employees to be part of that, and for employees to be able to attend is very great. We're very grateful for that. So Chief, I'd like to say a shout out to Chief Lorenz for support on that. And one final thing, in regards to, I said that the old defined benefit plan and employees are on the North Dakota PERS plan. I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of different employees from different departments, and this isn't a scientific study by any means, but in discussion, in passing, informally, when we bring up the pension, the city pension, the council needs to understand and realize how far your efforts to this plan go. The North Dakota PERS plan and this plan are completely different, but yet they do see your efforts. And in regards to retention, I think it really, really goes a long way. So, with that, we all we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for the support, and urge you to approve 4.1, please. Thank you.
Well, with that, do we have a motion? We got a motion to approve from Mr. Weber and a second from Ms. Dockler. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. I even think we had longtime city employee Al Grasser, who was a part of the Insurance and Pension Committee back for many years, also popped in that day. So that was great to see.
4.2, Alaris Center Portfolio.
Thank you. You want to, is Mike going to present
Yep.
this too? And this actually kind of spurred, I don't know if you want to should I hit some highlights, or do you want to go right into
I
it?
can hit the highlights, turn it over, Mike, if that works
Perfect.
for you. Mayor, city council members, as is stated in your staff report, during the joint meeting of the Alaris Commission and city council back in July, when we went through the projection of the CIP and cash flow, it was acknowledged and more due diligence was done on the investment return rate that was earning on that plan. Since that time, we've updated our projections with sales tax that flow into that fund, as well as our firming up some numbers on capital and past the sunset period, the CIP projections, as well as put together some portfolio scenarios for your consideration that use your home rule authority to expand a bit slightly on those investment returns. And Mayor, if you have anything else to highlight other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to go through some details in a further presentation.
Yeah, Mike, I think you can, go ahead, I can add at the end.
Thank you, Maureen. Mayor Boczynski and members of City Council. As Maureen had mentioned, over the last several months, we've looked at this portfolio in a number of different ways. Going back to that joint meeting that we had, at that point in time, we had simply shown the estimated balance of this portfolio by the time that the sales tax sunsets in 2029. And while that is good information to have, we really didn't put a whole lot of meaning behind that number. We kind of lack some perspective on exactly what we want the portfolio to do, how long that'll last, and just the overall goal of the portfolio itself, other than try to get as much money in there as possible. So over the last several months, we've done a lot to try to answer some of those questions, and hopefully we can get through some of those tonight. So just a little bit of background on what we can currently invest in. We follow state century code, which allows for just a handful of relatively safe investments. The biggest one that we invest in are United States-backed, any type of bond that's backed by the United States government in some way, shape, or form, primarily through mortgage-backed securities, through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, things of those natures. That's typically how we invest the majority of our money. We can also invest in CDs that are covered by FDIC insurance or additional collateral put up by the financial institution that we purchased the CD from. We can also invest in general obligation state and local municipal bonds, as well as some short-term lending to via commercial paper to corporations. As mentioned, primarily we invest in the United States mortgage-backed securities. We have about $8.5 million at work right now in this portfolio, with another $2 million in cash that we have yet to make for 2021. Just looking at the portfolio mix, we weren't sure exactly what direction we would take, so we haven't made that investment yet for 2021's budgeted allocation. If you also recall back to that meeting, that joint meeting that we had shown you a reinvestment rate of 1.5%. And while that's pretty much what we can do now with any type of new purchase or new investment, I just wanted to clarify that the portfolio overall is currently earning about 2.5%. So even though we can only reinvest about 1.5% given the current limitations, overall we're earning a little bit more than that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Again, as you may recall from that joint meeting, reinvestment rates aren't all that great right now. Looking at items that we could be investing in with current guidelines, this was a few months ago, so interest rates have trickled down a little bit since then, but you're looking a little bit less than 1.5% on anything that we can currently invest in right now. And projections on interest rates in the near to short term aren't going to be moving a whole lot. We saw how long it took after 2008 for interest rates to claw back, and history would indicate that's probably going to be the same in this case, and that looms somewhat significantly because the revenue source for this, being that sales tax, will sunset here pretty soon. So again, looking at things that we can invest in right now, still in that 1.5%, so that's where that number came from, if you recall that. So as we were looking at the portfolio, as Maria mentioned, we looked at it in multiple different ways. We first worked with Jonathan at the Alaris Center to give us more of a long-term capital needs assessment of the building past that 2029, date that we had currently showed. And in working with Jonathan, looking out to 2060, and I'll get to why we're using 2060 as the target date in a minute, but also adding on a little bit of inflation. It looks like the long-term capital needs for the building would be about $2.2 million a year. Obviously, some years will be much less than that. Other years will be considerably bigger when you're looking at these big 20-year fixes that we're currently working through right now on the 20-year-old building. So yeah, $2.2 million is what we're looking at on average. Maureen also mentioned just a second ago as well that sales taxes came in better than what we had originally projected. So compared to what you have seen before, we were able to not only increase this year's collections as part of this projection, but also into next year's, which trickles through the next 8 to 10 years of the sales tax projection before the sales tax sunset. So by increasing the sales tax revenue projections, we're also able to increase the amount that we're projecting to invest each year. What you had seen before was about $1.5 million a year, and with the excess sales tax, we're looking to increase that to $2 million a year before we have some larger cash dumps that we can invest in closer to the sunset period. And then, as I mentioned, as we're working with our broker-dealer, Nick Melby's his name, just throughout the conversations, we kind of came up with a question of what's the goal of this portfolio other than trying to get as much money in there. Did we just want to live on the interest? Did we have a specific date in mind? And we didn't run necessarily an assessment on the building itself, but we thought that 2060 would make a logical choice for this experiment or for this calculation. It would be about twice the original bond length that we took to construct this building. And as well as to get us through 2 more cycles of those 20-year fixes. And so that's how we came up with the number for 2060 to kind of give us a useful life of the building before we would have to do some widespread remodels or look at a new building at that point in time. So for this calculation, that's how we came up with that 2060 target date. So we ran the calculation in a couple different ways. First, we looked at the current portfolio mix of what we can invest in. And what would that look like? So what we're calling portfolio A would just be no change compared to current policy, where we're earning just shy of 1.5% on anything that we can reinvest in. And what that would end up with, that third column there, showing that the 2029 estimate would be about $40 million. Going back to that joint meeting, I believe the number we had shown it was about $33 million. So the difference there was primarily because we can invest another $500,000 over the next several years, and that adds up. So assuming that pretty conservative 1.48% interest, and the rationale there is with historic lows right now, if we can get that interest rate today, we can most likely get it a handful of years from now. So to remain conservative, we just kept that same reinvestment rate past that 2030 sunset, and that would earn about $600,000. As I mentioned, we're needing about $2.2 million on average, so long story short, we're going to have to dip into the principal of this investment portfolio to maintain the building based on Jonathan's CIP. So the calculation, we ran it in 2 different ways. I ran it more on a cash flow basis just to answer the question, how long does that last us? Because as I mentioned, some years we're spending way less, some years we're spending way more. And with making no changes compared to today's policy, that actually gets us out to 2048. So that's encouraging. That'll get us through 1 round of the next 20-year fixes that we'll need on the building. And it proves that we do have some time to make some moves, even if we don't make any changes. The other way that we ran the calculation was our broker-dealer looked at that 2060 target date and asked the question, what interest rate do we have to earn by 2030 to last us to 2060? And the footnote down there you can see is just about a little less than 4% is what we would have to earn on that $40 million from on average from that time and beyond. And just to give some perspective, right before the pandemic, even with the mortgage-backed securities that we currently invest in, I was getting about 3.2%. So historically, that's not out of the question, but also it shows that we're probably going to have to invest in some riskier items to get that higher balance and therefore a higher rate. So the next thing that we looked at was, working with the mayor and Todd, we thought, what if we leave a majority of the portfolio unchanged compared to what we can invest in now, but maybe allow up to 25% to get into some equities. And so we were looking at maybe stock market wide index funds, nothing that would be too centered on anything to try to diversify that as much, but still be in the equity game. and then also some higher rated preferred stocks. So that would again be equities, but they act very much like bonds with dividend payments and things of that nature. We listed some names there that kind of fit that investment grade category, and that's what we had used to try to mix in a little bit higher risk to gain a little bit more of the interest rate. And down below there, that second column, you can see that increase the assumed interest rate that we can get closer to 2.9%. That leads to about $5.5 million more in the portfolio by this time the sales tax sunsets, which again, using that same interest rate, that gives about $1.3 million a year. And when we're running the cash flow calculation there, because we actually spend less than what this would earn in interest up until we get to those next 20-year fixes in the late 2030s. So this actually gets us out to 2064, just based on Jonathan's CIP cash flow and what the interest earnings here could potentially do. Similarly, you can see the other way around. If we only had to get to 2060, we would have to earn just a little bit less than that, 2.8%. So again, before the pandemic, and even currently we're earning 2.5% on average, was earning 3.2 on some of those investments before the interest rates market really crashed. So that's definitely doable as well. And then finally, we wanted to take that level of risk one step further and say, we'll still look at 25% in the equity space, but how about that 75% of the portfolio, instead of keeping it with that federal backing like we currently have under current policy? What if we expanded that to get into some higher rated corporate bonds, as well as some non-United States agency-backed mortgage-backed securities? So it'd be very similar to the items that we invest in now. It just wouldn't have that federal backing, and we would lend it directly to the banks instead of to the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So you do get a little bit better interest rate from that, but you do lose that federal guarantee on the investment itself. But what that allows us to do down towards the bottom, it gets us up to about 3.3% assumed yield on the portfolio overall by mixing in some of those items. And it gets us a few $1 million more by 2029, up to $47.5 million. And that earns just shy of $1.6 million in interest, and that gets us all the way out to 2073. Then as you can see, if we still have that 2060 target date in the back of our minds, if we want to pare back the risk at that point, assuming we build the portfolio up to that 47 million, we would only have to earn that 2.5%. So again, both Portfolio B and Portfolio C, historically, that's not out of the realm of possibility to get that even on safe United States backed investments. So between working again with the mayor and Todd and Maureen, and we brought this to the Laris Commission, and we're a broker-dealer, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but we all kind of fell towards the middle there and felt that mix similar to Portfolio B would not only reach that objective to get us to 2060 and potentially beyond that, but it moved the needle enough without taking on so much risk that we still have 75% of the portfolio mix backed by the federal government. So that's where we kind of landed. We also wanted to add some specific language to if the investment rate environment were advantageous enough to do some internal financing. So instead of us borrowing money from others and incurring those fees, incurring the higher interest potentially, that we can, instead of borrowing somebody else's debt, we could just borrow from ourselves and save on all those transaction costs if the situation were advantageous. So I would put some specific language in there as well, just to get that covered. So with that, we were looking to recommend Portfolio B, and then looking for a motion to give the administration authority, or not authority, but the nod to use our home rule charter to change the investment policy above and beyond what the Century Code states, and also wanted to get your feedback and any questions at this time.
Thank you. Mike, just hang around. We might have some questions for you. I just wanted to give my thoughts quickly. I think it's a really prudent thing to do, something we've worked on. We worked with President Sandy on this as well. He was probably more in favor, in the future, maybe potentially taking out more risk so that we can sunset that sales tax. We thought this was a good middle ground, at least for the next year, and we'll revisit it in a year. But looking at where inflation's at and looking at interest rates now, the Fed target rate's at 0.25%. A 10-year Treasury pays you 1.42%. If you've got 6% inflation and you're earning the 10-year, you're going backwards by 3.6 every year, considering the costs are going to increase. So I think it's, a really prudent thing to do. something to probably look at every year as circumstances change. And really, if you look at this item and the previous item, these are things that set us up well in the future. I mean, this is 8 years down the line for this one. The previous one with the defined benefit is 14 years later. We'll probably all be gone by this point, but it's setting us up well for the future. So whoever's in our seats will have a lot easier decisions to make. So with that, I really like to, to see at least us go to portfolio B and then revisit it in a year. So if you got any questions for Mike at this time, please, or Maureen or anything, yeah.
Ken, does he have a?
Ken, as our Alaris, our Event Center Commissioner, if you could give us any notes or your thoughts would be really helpful too.
Yeah, just very quickly, this is the first time I've had this level of presentation, so thanks very much for that. That's ideal. But I guess I think with the research and all the work that's been done, I also support the recommendation that has come forward as the representative, and as the mayor says, we'll take a look at this again in a year. So with that, I'm very supportive.
Thank you. Ms. Mock, please.
So if we revisit in a year, are you or the Alaris Center, are you going to track and then we'll revisit in 1 year's time to see how that goes, then make a decision going forward?
Yes, Ms. Mock, as we've finally been able to put some context to this portfolio and working with Jonathan at the Alaris Center. Of course, the expense side of it can change every year as well. So we'll definitely track that and see where we're sitting and at what level. Just because it's up to 25% of the portfolio might be in some of those riskier things doesn't mean we have to actually do 25%. So we can always pare that back. If sales tax comes in even better, great. And if the capital side comes in a bit less than projected, great. So we'll definitely keep track on it and monitoring now that we have kind of the foundation in place.
And then is it pretty, going forward, assuming it does well for a year, is it pretty flexible to change those numbers, and look to the next year to do 80-20 or the 25-75?
Sure, yes. I have the spreadsheet I put together kind of it goes out to 2060. We can definitely, if we feel there's going to be a larger pot of money at that point in time, we can expand out another 20 years and go out to 2080 and look more specifically on that cash flow side of things as well.
It's also flexible because you're going to have $2 to $3 million coming in each year, so you can shift that as you turn cash into investments. So it'll be flexible year to year in that front. Probably a great chance at the City Council's Events Commission, the combined meeting, to kind of start to think about each year as we do that in the summer and then go into the fall and decide what we want to do. I would think would be a good way forward. So.
But do we have that flexibility to shift even some of the money that we have invested to?
Well, right now there's like 8 million in the portfolio,
Yep.
so it's currently, and there's a little bit more than 2 million that's going to be invested here shortly, or basically after we approve this. So that would almost set us up, right there at 20%, because we could go right into those slightly more risky assets
Yep.
without having to sell and possibly take some losses on past investments. Probably likely the bonds will be held to their fulfillment because their rates are higher.
Yep, I was just going to add a comment there that the mortgage-backed securities that we're in now, we can buy and sell those whenever we so choose, but typically we buy and hold until the maturity date. So that's what we've practiced. And again, it's earning better than we could probably reinvest right now, so there'd be no point to sell that. But so there would be a little limitations there, but as the mayor pointed out, we still have $2 million for this year, another $2 million for next year that we can invest where we decide is the most prudent spot.
And then the next year that can be revisited and
Correct.
make that decision. Okay.
Further comments or motions? Mr. Weber?
I'll make a motion and then I have some questions, comments. But I'll move approval of Portfolio B.
Sounds great. We got a motion. Do we have a second? We got a second. Motion from Councilmember Weber and a second from Councilmember Weigel. So Mr. Weber, please.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for your patience with me. I want to make sure I'm understanding. We set money aside for future maintenance needs. That money is currently sitting in a situation where it's not even keeping up with inflation. And so we're looking at the possibility of more active investments so that we can possibly, it can be self-sustaining to some degree in the future. And that all sounds fantastic. In fact, we maybe should have done this earlier, but we're also in a really fortunate point we're flush with cash, and we have a fantastic award-winning finance department that's put us in this place. So we're lucky on a number of levels. The question I have, and if I'm understanding all of that right, the question I have is slide number 4. Current portfolio limitations currently follow North Dakota Century Code. So we're told to run more like a business, and yet we often have our hands tied by things like this. So currently, if we follow the North Dakota Century Code, we're limited to these kinds of investments. We're not interested in taking all the money down to the races or to the roulette table and putting it on red, but the current Century Code really constrains what we can do with that. But as a home rule city, we have the freedom to do something beyond that. And you mentioned that we do lose some federal guarantees. Help me to understand that part a little better.
Yes, Mr. Weber, as part of the Century Code, you can invest in any type of investment that has the federal government backing. So any of their agencies, such as Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they're backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. So pretty much as safe as if there were something worse than 2008 happen again, we at least have the federal backing that if the principal, again, these are mortgage-backed securities, so if people stop making their mortgage payments, they can't pay the banks can't pay Fannie and Freddie, they can't pay us. And so with that federal backing, we at least have that principal backed by the United States government. So that would be what we would lose on part of that portfolio, or if we went with the portfolio C, where we even allowed the bigger chunk of the portfolio to not have those types of investments. That's the potential, and that's the added risk that you get for that added yield on the interest rate side.
So here's what all of that was leading up to. Can we have an ongoing conversation about what other funds we currently have that we should be looking at doing something else like this? Yeah, thanks.
Yep, certainly can.
And Mr. Weber, Mayor Butchusey, members of council, just to clarify, we look at this plan every year. We've been investing, we've been setting money aside. The only change really that we're presenting to you tonight is a slight shift in the investments that so a 25% shift. It still is a plan that's very safe and secure and not jeopardizing the health of the plan, but we have been setting aside those reserve dollars, and it's more recently since we refinanced that bond in 2016, late 2015, where it generated a little bit more gap between our capital and debt service versus collections that we've been starting to build to a larger dollar amount here. So really that portfolio has been building since 2016, and we want to make sure we maximize those dollars without jeopardizing security and safety of the funds.
I've sent you an email during all of this, so I'm curious if we could have a conversation sometime about JDA funds and what can and can't be done there as well. But not that we need to have that discussion right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Excellent points. Any further discussion from council? All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, I believe we're to 4.24, which is preliminary approval of replat of West Elementary re-subdivision.
All right, thank you. Did you want some further awareness first, Mr. Brooks, or did you want to start, Ms. Stockler?
Mr. Brooks can go ahead and start if you'd like.
Oh, sure. So the plat that we have before us under 4.24 is the former West School site. It was zoned R1. It was recently closed by the school district, and developers purchased the property with the intent of putting up 11 single-family homes on the site. The plat shows those 11 single-family home within that area. It's roughly a city block, roughly 300 by 300, I'll just say roughly. Single-family lots will be directed out to North 25th Street. There's 5 lots that'll be directly out to North 25th, 3 that'll access 6th Avenue on the south side of that. And then there's an additional 3 that'll be off of what we're now proposing to be called Columbia Court Lane, which is currently the alley that runs along the west side. It's a little unusual, but we thought it was the best use of the property there. We have had a neighborhood meeting that was very well attended. And I think there was a general fear from the neighborhood that there was going to be a request for apartments to go in on that location. So I think they were very happy with the request that was shown to them. There's lots of questions too on what the neighborhood feel would be and those types of things. But overall, there's some proposed designs, but nothing set in stone from the developer in terms of the look of the neighborhood. One item that we did hear from one planning commissioner, he was hoping to see some alleys, but overall we did get, I think there was just one vote against the plat and then 100% unanimous on the PUD, which I think you guys already approved here tonight. So with that, hopefully I hit all those points and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Dockler.
Thank you. I do have some questions because I did have constituents reach out to me that were able to attend the meeting and who weren't able to attend the meeting. And so you're right, I think that there's an overall kind of happiness that there isn't a proposed apartment complex that's going there to replace the West School building. But I think that upon hearing that, people didn't really have enough time to digest that, oh, it's not going to be an apartment complex, but it's going to be 11 single-family units, but not necessarily single-family owner-occupied units. Because that is kind of a special zoned area where if there is a single-family home that is being rented, it can only have up to 4 unrelated individuals in that building. And the house designs that are being proposed are currently 4-bedroom designs. And I think one of the concerns that was brought up to me was that there wasn't an active plan in advertising these houses for sale, like Thompson Homes, for example, but that perhaps all 11 of these houses in that area would then be used immediately as rentals, which would mean 11 houses times 4, 44 new individuals moving into that area, and so then 44 new cars presumably into that area where parking has been an issue in the past for current individuals that live over in that neighborhood, where they have not had the ability to park near their house or because it's all taken up by rental parking, which that's nothing that we can control. We can't say that you can't park on the street. And that's a conversation I have quite often with folks in my ward. But looking at this development as it is currently proposed, that's a significant impact that it would have on that neighborhood that I don't think has really been thought about, other than this would be development in the west area. So that's something that I have a concern about. I'm wondering if the developers would consider, instead of having, or the developers would consider in the northwest corner, maybe removing one of those homes or possibly selling or donating that land to the Habitat for Humanity or to the Community Land Trust, so that we could also incorporate specific affordable housing into that development. I think it would be kind of a buy-in into the neighborhood and the community to show goodwill that you're trying to match what's already there and be a good neighbor, essentially. I did have a resident also ask me that, could they possibly look at these 4-bedroom houses and maybe look at not finishing a basement, because it wasn't real clear, just like you stated, about what exactly is going to be done, so that the price point would maybe drop, because the number that they were talking about that these houses would cost is around that $400,000 price point. And while there should be mixed opportunities of different kinds of houses to live in neighborhoods, it does it does not necessarily fit that particular neighborhood with $400,000, 11 houses all being built in that spot. So maybe 3 or 4 would go for sale for sure, but then what about the other ones? Again, then we go back to that rental conversation, which is ongoing in my ward. So that's a lot for you to respond to first. I do have other questions as well, but I don't know if you could shed some light on that.
Well, I do know that the owner is represented here, mostly probably more on the civil engineering side, so I probably won't turn to Mike Corman with CPS and ask him to respond to how to handle that. I will say that this is preliminary. I can bring that up to him and to the owners about final in terms of your thoughts on the potential donation on that northwest corner. For the other items, the cost to build new is, just about everywhere. It's very expensive. We're finding a tough time, I think, as we talked about too in the past. It's tough to even build a new home at 300,000, and you have to get really narrow lots, and then that 300,000 comes with specials on top of that. These will be, there won't be any specials on these that I'm aware of at this point, because I think everything's already been taken care of. So there is some value. That 400,000, unfortunately, that's just the market and where we're at in terms of building new without any new dollars, any benefits, or any incentives being put on there through some other subsidy. That the cost of a new single-family home, it would be difficult to get with any buyer today and get a price point lower than that. So
I think that's why the question came up of, could they maybe build these houses so that it was 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and then the basement unfinished, so perhaps it could sell at a little bit lower of a price point just to give more options for people to buy into that neighborhood. But you're right, it does need to be heavily subsidized in some way or another if we're talking about kind of affordable housing. Is there a possibility of using economic development funds to do some sort of housing incentive to subsidize people who are willing to buy rental homes, to flip them into single-family owner-occupied homes? Because the wear and tear on a rental home is pretty significant, and so once it becomes a rental home, particularly in my ward, it pretty much seals its deal and stays a rental home and just passes hands in ownership, and that really does impact our housing availability on the north end, and particularly affordable housing, since a lot of those homes are a little bit older, a little bit smaller, and would be, of interest to somebody, but because of the wear and tear on the house from being a rental, they're not interested. So I guess I'd be interested in maybe having that conversation. Earlier this year, we had talked about some sort of housing incentive to get people into homes. I feel like this would really kind of drive possibly folks who are struggling the most to get into their own homes and help them, and then also look to flip our neighborhoods or kind of work on the blight that possibly is in our neighborhoods due to some of these homes being rentals and perhaps not necessarily being taken care of as well as they would be if they were homeowner and then single family occupied as well. But that's just something to think about that I would really be happy to work on with whoever it may be. I think that some of the other things too that came up right before the meeting in particular, and I did share this with you before, but I'll say it for the record, neighbors in that area were really frustrated that they hadn't received a notice to the meeting. We did our due diligence of, I think it was 400 feet around the school, but some neighbors who were maybe on the end of the block didn't receive one because they weren't within that 400 feet, but we're talking about a block. I think we should go the extra mile and just include the entire block next time, and I don't know if we need to include that in written somewhere, or if that just becomes our mode of operation. I think it just shows that we are trying our best to inform everyone. We can't canvass the entire Ward 2 that a meeting is going to happen. That's just not reasonable, and it's not financially responsible to send things out like that, but I do think that we can look at the way that we let people know about the meeting a little bit better. And then going back to parking. This is an ongoing conversation in my ward, and I truly think that 11 new houses with the possibility of 44 new people, unrelated, all with their own cars, parking in that area, even with garages, knowing that people have different schedules and so they park differently. We have a significant problem of people parking on lawns in our neighborhoods and all over the place, and that is actually a strikeable offense within our current rental ordinances, but I don't believe that it is actually being enforced. There are houses on 6th Avenue North, for example, that park on their lawns all the time, and UNDPD, not gonna, and then also GFPD, we drive by all the time and they're never cited. And so that's something that I think that I would like an update on at the next meeting if possible, an update on the rental program and how these ordinances are being enforced. This is a conversation I've had for the last almost 4 years that Mr. Brooks and I have been working on, and it would be nice, especially with a new director position created to enforce this kind of stuff. It would be nice that it was actually happening, because I don't believe that it is. So I would like an update if that's possible as well. But these are the concerns that I'm hearing, that I'm relaying. I think it's important for the developer to hear it as well. But then also for the city to think about, because I think we need to be, again, intentional on how we are looking at developing our city. The North End isn't just a throwaway neighborhood. And I think, again, I've said this before, on the North End, there is this thought or idea that the city itself doesn't care about them. It's kind of that chip on the shoulder mentality that everything of worth is being developed or moved out south, and then the North End is being left behind. So folks that live and work on the North End aren't receiving the full benefit of their city. And whether that's true or not, you still have to address it. It's that elephant in the room that unless you name it, you can't address it. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we're not willing to do that. And so I think that unfortunately that falls into this conversation, because that's in the back of a lot of the constituents in Ward 2's mind. So I'm ready to vote.
Okay. Any further comment on item 4.24? Yes.
Mayor,
Mr. Veen, please.
Okay, sorry. I was just listening to the comments Ms. Doctor talked about, especially the neighborhood concerns on the potential apartment building, and of course the relief that this wasn't going to be apartments but single family. But you know, if all of those single family homes are rented out, it's probably not a lot different than apartment buildings. So Mr. Brooks, just a question on there. Is there some type of restrictive covenants that can be put on that they not become rental and that they still remain and are sold as single family houses?
I'm not aware, actually, I'm under the belief that I don't think you can restrict somebody from renting property, but I'll be sure to check the legality of that.
Yeah, if you would, I would appreciate that, because that does make a difference for me. I'd certainly like to see these built and this to proceed, but having that type of impact here may be problematic. And so if we could see what we can possibly do along that matter, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think you would need a larger plan. You couldn't just cherry pick, necessarily that one area if you're going to encompass that. Has the developer made an indication that they're planning on renting out every house?
Well, I think the question was asked whether they would be for sale, and at the neighborhood meeting, he said, well, sure, yeah, if somebody was interested, he would sell them.
Yeah.
So I think that was a stance. I don't know, if they've marketed. I think that was Ms. Dockler's question, whether they were marketed, but I think he just tore down the building. I don't know where he's at in the whole process still. Nothing's going to be ready until spring.
Yeah, well, I think the rental is something we can look at broader. I'm sure financially they're trying to make this work. They spent a lot of money to tear down and make it. Is it a good solution to have 11 houses there? It's, most people would probably be happy. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I think there's, some more answers to be had. There's obviously, property rights that the owner has that to be able to, in some sense build what they can financially be feasible there. But was there a particular, I guess if there's a guidance that you wanted as follow-up, Ms. Dockler, particularly that he can, if you had a few points, like exact bullet points for him to follow up on?
That would be great. I'd like to know exactly what kinds of houses, I guess, that they're developing, what price point they are for cost if somebody wanted to purchase them, if they would be willing to do, an unfinished basement in order to drop that price point a little bit. I do think that they got a steal of a deal on the land for that building, and then the demolition of West School was actually significantly lower than even what our city was thinking that it would be. So they're looking to profit considerably from this, and it's a great business move. I'm not denying them that, and I'd love to see houses go in there. I'm just trying to think of a way that this would be the most beneficial for that neighborhood and our community. Because again, these kinds of developments, they can't happen in a vacuum. They also impact the larger city and other entities within the city, like the school system. Part of the reason why enrollment is so low in some of these North End schools is because of the turning over of single-family owner-owned occupants moving out of the area or selling to rentals, and then all of those families not being there to be in the schools. That significantly impacts our entire community as a whole. And so I think it's all tied together. It's not happening just this one plan and then we move on to the next thing. They're all tied together, and so we have to have this broader conversation about it. So I would like to see those things for price points. I'd also like to see if there's a possibility of having conversation about using economic development dollars to create some kind of program like that, to incentivize and subsidize people into buying rental homes to flip them into single-family owner-occupied homes. And then I would also like follow-up and an update on the rental program and enforcement of these kinds of things. The 311, I know that people are reporting. Myself, I've been using the app, and there isn't been a lot of feedback for those who are reporting things about rental issues specifically. About potholes, sure. About lights out, city or street lamps out, absolutely. But for rental specific issues that are being reported, not as much. So I'd like an update on that as well.
Mayor, I think our plan would be to Councilmember Dockler that we would bring it back. Mr. Baseplug, as the building inspections director, he'd be in charge of the rental program and the follow-up in that regard. Some of this relates to planning and some of it relates to economic development. So I think those are the three bins that we have. And so I would target the council meetings of January 10th and 17th would be our next pairing of meetings. So I think some of them these items will require city council to move them forward, as well as there'll be some updates. So we would target January 10th and 17th to bring the issues forward in those three categories.
And then to piggyback on what Mr. Ravine had said as well, I'd like an update just on whether a cap would be considered discriminatory at a federal level for fair housing or not. Because I think that once we reach a capacity of, even if you look at University Avenue, probably 90% of those homes are rentals at this point, and that's what we found out with the University Corridor study. That's not specific to just University Avenue. That is kind of made its way into the majority of my ward, Ward 2, particularly around that University Avenue area, or the University Park area, and so that's, again, part of this conversation.
I've got that on my list as well.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, without a broader plan, I think it's really difficult to say you can't build a house and finish the basement there. You have to have a max. I can't imagine that that's what government's role should be in those types of things without some sort of broader plan. So I don't know if that can be put together. It seems like we're talking about something overarching that I think it'd be hard to put the brakes on this development if we need to develop something over 6 months. I've heard the exact opposite. I've heard, I can't believe they paid that much for this. Usually a school that's torn down to be built for something, the cities almost give them away. So I think they're going to have a hard time, being in the business and knowing they're going to have a hard time making money on this to begin with. So I can't imagine that the developer is going to be too excited, to be dictated on what he gets to build there beyond what we'd already have in code or already as a plan. So we can definitely go forward and look at a broader plan. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I think that's great. It's getting course inspections involved along with planning. But at this time, to delay this, I think is a tough ask, but certainly up to council's discretion. Ms. Mock?
Yeah, so looking at the proposed plat, it seems, and I understand they probably don't have designs for the houses at this point, but presumably they would have garage access off of 25th and 6th, since you wouldn't have an alley to access most of those lots, like lots 1 through 5, and then 6, 7, and 8. So would they have the garage off of those roads, and then would there be parking as well along like North 25th and 6th Avenue?
Yeah, you'd,
Like you could park on the streets as well, and
yeah,
then they'd have driveway parking.
they'd have driveway parking as well.
Okay.
Yep.
So then, it seems like lots 9, 10, and 11, would they have that with the Columbia Court Lane as well?
Yeah, so there probably wouldn't be any street parking there. He knew that that was going to be the case, and
Okay.
the designers did, they did make those lots a little bit longer as well, knowing that they're probably going to end up with a longer driveway.
Okay, so they
So-
would try to get some extra
Correct.
parking off?
Yep.
Okay. Because it seems like those would be the 3 lots that would potentially have the largest issue with.
Yeah, and lot 11 could certainly potentially have a alley access, because that is going to be an alley along that north
Okay.
edge there.
Have they explored a possibility of an alley behind those lots that butt up against each other, like 9 through 11 and
Yeah,
1 through 3, or did that
we
leave
did,
too much space?
I know they showed examples, and if you want to get into the whole details, but I have seen concepts of alleys going and crisscrossing, and it did increase the cost of the utility piece, because then you're bringing in alleys, you're bringing in, it was increasing the cost, and the actual layout wasn't improved, because then we were going to have to, that alley then had to come out to some street, otherwise we were making an L with the alley, you know, if we were just going to try to scoop it. So we tried some different options, and none of them were. I think this one, if you take a look at the neighborhood, a lot of those homes, although there is alleys currently there, a lot of them are front loaded. So there is a driveway coming from the front street. They're utilizing alley for garbage pickup, but a lot of them are front loaded. So the house being accessed, or the driveway, is on the street side of the home. So that was the majority of the neighborhood.
Okay.
So.
And then, I mean, while we're asking questions, I would think that if the developer were open to custom builds, there's really not a lot of opportunity for people to build a custom home in the heart of Grand Forks. Really, there are very few lots that are just open, so if the developer were open to that, I would imagine there's some appetite for people wanting to build in various locations, and this would be kind of a north end opportunity for that, and that might reduce some of the concern over rentals.
And that's a great point, because there's a lot of people that work at university that want to be in this neighborhood, and you don't end up with too many opportunities like this. So I'm hoping that he is going to, that somebody does take advantage of that, so one way or the other. So, and it's a great area. University Park is still, it's kind of a shining star out there still. It's great open space, and this is located right across the street.
There's a lot of positives about the location that I think would appeal to a lot of people, especially if you're building new, and I would think that that would actually help the neighborhood if you got some new homes at that type of a price point. And I don't think we can mandate that, just a suggestion that might actually be a unique opportunity we haven't seen for a while.
Mr. Weber, please.
Given Council Rep. Dockler's concerns and what's just been suggested by Vice President Mock, and the fact that the ground's frozen hard right now, what would be, are there concerns about tabling this until January?
We haven't officially gone to the public hearing. That's in January. So we're setting up for that. We've advertised for that at this point. So this is just preliminary tonight. We're still going to final. We'll have some of those answers at that meeting. And then that was our hope, is that we would get to that point where we, because the design was the main thing. What do we think we need to see for a design? This really does fit. I think a lot of her points that are being, Councilwoman's Dockler's points are being made aren't necessarily changing the design. I think it's, some real issues in terms of rental versus property ownership, but whether or not we can solve those, we'll definitely have an answer soon, but I don't know if that changes what the vote would be tonight. But I could be wrong.
Could I ask Mr. Brooks a question?
Yeah.
When will this public hearing be slated? What date?
January 5th will be at our next planning and zoning, January
And then
5th.
when will it come back to city council?
January 18th, I think, because of MLK Day.
Okay.
So
So I
there's another,
think
you got another shot at both planning and at city council to further voice opinions on it and get more
Absolutely.
information. Mr. Phelan, sorry.
And I think you could even bring, that's why if we bring it to the 10th and 17th, we could even bring it to a working session in advance of the public hearing at city council on the 17th. And if you do want to do anything at that point, you can always hold it there. But I would encourage you to move it forward. And there's something about, you always say this, Mr. Weber, some good tension, that something may happen to bring out the best in an item. So I'd encourage you to pass it. And Mr. Brooks and Mr. Batesflu, they can bring some of the issues that may relate to planning and zoning to the committee of the whole on the 10th in advance of the 27th, or of the 18th, I guess, since it's Martin Luther King Day.
So your answer is we should vote on it tonight?
You should vote on it and move it forward.
Those are two different answers, but good, okay.
Any further comment for tonight? I think you got a good list to work on. Do we have a motion? We'll give it another second. Anybody willing to make a motion on this item at this point? We got a motion from Mr. Weigel. We got a second from Ms. Mock. Any further comment? Just want to roll call this, please, Maureen.
Sure. Weigel?
Yes.
Dockler?
No.
Weber?
No.
Mock?
Yes.
And Kavami's not in attendance, and neither is Sandy. Veen?
Yes.
We have 3 yeses, 2 nos.
All right, the motion carries 3-2. It is approved. Motion carries. All right, 4.25, introduction of an ordinance and preliminary approval. I guess you normally call it out. Go ahead, Marie.
Nope, that's just fine. Introduction of the ordinance, preliminary approval of an ordinance to amend the zoning map to approve West School and micro PUD.
I would imagine this is going to go along the similar lines for the vote. We got a motion from Mr. Weigel. Do we have a second? Then we can further discussion. Are you seconding it, or second from Ms. Mock? All right, we'll open this one up to discussion. Ms. Stockler.
I was just going to second.
Oh, okay. All right, any further comment? Seeing none. Why don't we go ahead and roll call that again? Thank you.
Weigel?
Yes.
Dockler?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Mock? And Veen?
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Perfect. Motion carries. 4.26, Mr. Gostad, yeah, please, or
Nope,
Mr.
that's to approve the opioid litigation settlements participation agreement with McKesson Corporation, Cardinal Health Incorporated, and AmerisourceBergen Corporation, which are collectively the distributors, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc., and its parent company, Johnson & Johnson, in opioid litigation case, master docket number 117 MD 2804, opioid litigation settlement memorandum of understanding of the state of North Dakota and authorized attorneys to execute all documents.
I'm glad I let you read that one. Mr. Gostad, some insight, please.
Yes. Since our last meeting, as you know, our attorneys that have been representing us in the litigation have recommended the participation agreements with respect to the distributors and Johnson & Johnson, basically settlement agreements. These need to be approved by January 2nd. There are some financial issues if there isn't enough participation by the state and its political subdivisions. So they're recommending that we go forward with that. The one item, and this is where the motion should come in, is the settlement memorandum of understanding with the state of North Dakota. That is premature for the council to approve. Further discussions on that particular agreement are still ongoing. I've had discussions with both Cass County representatives. They are not at this point prepared to go forward with that memorandum of understanding. And I believe Grand Forks County is considering it tomorrow, and they're also not going to deal with the memorandum of understanding at this point. So your motion should only be with respect to the participation agreements and not with the memorandum of understanding, because it is premature at this point.
Thank you. I think we had some good discussion in executive session on this, and this is largely in line with what we discussed that night, Mr. Gosted.
It aligns completely with the recommendations from our attorneys and the financial difficulties. There'd be a loss in what the settlement amounts would be if we didn't agree to the participation settlements.
Mr. Weigel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke last week at our executive session. I'm not a fan of it. I still don't understand how we successfully sue and the state of North Dakota gets our winnings, essentially, to read. Do I need to stop?
Answer that. Yep, and I can answer
Okay.
that. That's precisely why the memorandum of understanding is premature, because there'll be further discussions on that. It's really the participation agreements are critical, because those are basically settlement agreements with the distributors and the manufacturers only, and not necessarily the allocation. And that's why the motion should only be with respect to those participation.
So we could essentially speak with our friends
Yes.
regarding that agreement and work some type of magic through your office.
There are discussions it may not be with my office, it may be with my office and with Roxanna Pierce's office as well, collectively with other political subdivisions in the state, to have further discussions with the state of North Dakota.
Perfect. I'll make that motion.
Okay, we get, and then just to be clear, it's motion to approve 4.26 A and B of the participation forms. Is that correct, Mr. Weigel?
That's correct.
All right, do we have a second? Second from Mr. Weber. Further discussion? Ms. Mock, please.
So the memorandum of understanding we would revisit in the future when that's developed and we would have more input on that?
Correct.
Okay.
Do we table it or just ignore it tonight?
We don't have it as part of the motion, so unless if there's some motion to approve it.
Unless it gets added, all right. All right, any further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. That's all for action items tonight. We'll move on to information items.
5.1, investment portfolio summary as of November 30th. And 5.2, HR 2022 salary plan addendum. 5.3 is the 2021-22 snowmobile route.
Thank you. Now we'll open the citizen comment period. Anybody here wish to speak tonight under the citizen comment period? All right, that period will be closed. Moving on to 7, approval of minutes and bills.
7.1, vendor list as presented.
Get a motion to approve the vendor list. We got a motion from Mr. Weber, a second from Vice President Mock. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The vendor list is approved. I don't believe there's any minutes tonight, is that correct? Okay, so we'd move on to 8, city administrator comments. Mr. Phelan.
Happy holidays, and thank you to the mayor and you guys as city council members, policymakers. I think it's been an extraordinarily good year, and Grand Forks is moving in the right direction. I also want to thank all the department heads, to include Mr. Gostet, my right-hand guy over here that I love to work with, and all the city employees. That really the enriching part of being the city administrator is all the great things that happen day to day in our city and all the great employees that we have, and what an honor to serve the city of Grand Forks and the citizens along with all the city employees. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. 9, mayor and council member comments. Mr. Weigel, any comments tonight?
I would just echo what Mr. Phelan said, and that if we all hurry, we can go watch the Vikings beat the Bears. That is all, Mayor.
I don't think Mr. Phelan said that. Did you say that, Mr. Phelan?
Just echoing the first part.
Oh, okay,
and
first
then,
part.
I added the
Ms.
second
Dockler,
part
please.
myself.
No.
Please. After that, Mr. Weber? We got Mr. Veen online? Any comments tonight, sir?
Nothing new.
All right, Vice President Mock.
Thank you. Happy holidays. One thing I'm wondering if we can look at in 2022, years ago, we recorded all the meetings and they were just available on the website so that you could look at them. So if you just went to the website, you could see the past recordings for the past week or so. And now we do the Facebook Live. So I think for people who happen to catch it, it's really great. It's right in your feed. But if you go back to watch it, I feel like it's not as intuitive for somebody who maybe wants to go back and watch a meeting. Is there a way we can look at that and see if there's another option or a way to get it back on the website when you just go to the city of Grand Forks to see it there? I mean, I think there's a YouTube channel too, but I just don't think that's as counterintuitive if you're the average citizen wanting to go look, or if you don't want to have a Facebook account, you just want to watch and pick up a meeting.
Yeah, that'd be a great question for probably Greta, who's back there. I don't think she has a mic, but she's nodding her head and says yes, thumbs up. I think getting a link.
But we could talk about it maybe at a future meeting.
Yeah, she's nodding yes through the tiny window, so
Cool.
Good point.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm the last one. Just want to thank the council. I want to thank city staff. It's been one heck of a year in a lot of different ways, but the city is moving in the right direction. It's getting noticed across the state. It's been a challenging time, a lot of work to do going into the future. Workforce issues persist within the city, but everybody's really stepped up, and it's for the benefit of everybody. So just from the bottom of my heart, thank you, and just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and God bless. Spend some time with your families and enjoy. With that, motion to adjourn from Mr. Weigel, second from Mr. Weber. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.